I want to thank George and Donald for inviting me. Is there some ringback on this? Can you hear that? No? Okay. For inviting me to participate in this year's lecture series, and thank you to the University of Waterloo for hosting this event. It's my first time visiting the school, and I have a particular interest in your co-op program as one of your recent graduates, who is actually seated here today, Allison Boys, will be starting as our first full-time, well, first ever employee at Modernist on Monday. So as Donald said, my name is Kyra Clarkson. I'm a practicing architect in Toronto, and I'm here to talk about a venture that I've started recently with my husband, Chris, that aims to combine the skills of an architect, of both of us, with the entrepreneurship of the real estate developer. Now I'm going to just work on this technology for a moment. There we go. Just as a preamble, architects, we're all in school, we are encouraged to embrace design risk on all levels. We're taught that we should never be too wedded to an established idea. We're trained to be comfortable trying out new things, pushing the envelope, and yet for the most part, this risk-taking is confined to design. We eagerly take on new forms, new materials, new systems, technologies, and tools, but architects don't typically embrace investment risk. Well, it's scary. Saying as one who has just done it and continues to do it, we're not normally comfortable taking that sort of financial risk of managing and owning a project. But non-designers, by leaving non-designers in charge of making final decisions on projects, we have less to lose, I suppose, but we have also much less to gain. Because architects will earn design fees on projects, and we will enjoy the satisfaction of making something, of making a place, and of innovating, but we don't reap the profits of our own input. Let's see. So architects' intuition, in our estimation, is better than better than developers are about what matters. Our experience is really well suited to directing and managing complex problems and projects, and we take a central leadership role as mastermind coordinator, pulling together a wide range of consultants, advisors to make a complex system actually come together and get built. And this type of leadership and coordination is a key to success in business, no matter in what field, but really no more so than in real estate development. So why not leverage our comfort with risk, our understanding of the building process, plus our appreciation for how design can add value to be our own developers? So this is an idea that my husband and I thought about for years, and finally decided to test out with the founding, well, about this time last year, actually. It was in July when we found our first property, and we founded Modernist, which is a design-driven, downtown-focused development company led by 2 trained architects, where all the projects are driven by a commitment to architectural excellence, good urbanism, solid construction, and modern downtown living. And where maximizing profits is not the financial model. So, three motivators, really got us started. 1, an ugly epidemic. If you look around at houses being built downtown, and I'll just mostly talk about Toronto because that is my experience, but we could extrapolate to other cities, but it's just astonishing to us how ugly most houses, new houses, are, despite the presence of an incredibly strong design community in a city like Toronto. Builder top-ups, you can imagine this bungalow, right? It's 1 story. It's been extruded up, covered in stucco with fake stone coining on the sides, and this ridiculous railing, and but this neo-historicist aesthetic is meant to fit into a context, fit into a neighborhood, but the artificiality, the cheap materials contrast so sharply with the integrity of those original solid brick bungalows, and their design aesthetic seems to run so counter to the growing market of young, design-savvy professionals looking to buy. But still, they continue to proliferate. We see them all over because they still sell. And their sales success points to a pent-up demand, in our estimation, for houses downtown. So the modernist proposition, actually, I'm sorry, I've skipped over something. The second motivator was actually the renovation challenge. Having practiced now for 5 years, I've had my fair share of experiences with existing Toronto houses, housing stock that's about 100 years old, give or take. This house was built in 1908. And though sometimes charming and solidly built, most of these houses need such substantial work that really to get a modern house, a modern interpretation of this house, you basically got the entire interior, retained some of the brick, probably changed some of the masonry openings, add a whole, dig out the basement, new systems entirely. Really, this house probably cost more to build, to rebuild, than it would have to start new. And it's difficult to create a fully modern expression on the exterior of an existing Victorian or arts and crafts house. Sometimes on the interior, did I switch? Sometimes on the interior, it's a little, this is another project. On the interior, it can be a little easier, clean up, use a lot of steel to open up a space, but the end result often has to accept compromises, as nothing is quite square and plumb as you can imagine in a house that's settled over time. So how to negotiate those intersections can be tricky. And really, many homeowners are quite daunted by the prospect of renovating. The time and effort required to find the house, find the architect, go through the design process, and live through a protracted renovation period. Well, hopefully move out while you do the renovation and then move back in. But that time and that investment is a scary one for many. And the third motivator was really the condo proliferation since the 1990s in Toronto. And their success, now 275,000 condo units, I think, exist in Toronto. Their success really shows the desire for a no-fuss product and the desire for people to live downtown. And the marketing emphasis on design, so everything sort of designery inside, indicates that there really is a market for clean, distinctly modern living spaces. But condos are mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms, as many of you have probably lived in condos such as these, and they don't really provide for families downtown. There's a recent controversy when a councillor made, you probably will remember this in Toronto if some of you live in Toronto, but made the comment that families aren't meant to live downtown. Downtown is not for families, and that condo developers should not be required to include 3-bedroom units in their projects. That was considered a hardship. And we firmly believe that families do want to stay downtown, do want to live downtown, but good new urban houses are missing from the options available. So now I'll come to the modernist proposition. We believe there's a huge untapped market for modern downtown infill houses. Is this working? There we go. That there's a growing demand from couples, young families, empty nesters who love the modern look of the condo loft but want the space of a house in which to live downtown. And in the short time that we've been doing this, with virtually no advertising budget, we've received dozens of inquiries now from people eagerly wanting to buy the next house. This is an image of our first house, what we call very creatively House 1, which is in Leslieville, and I will tell you much more about that tonight. Our business model is based on architectural excellence, attention to detail, modern design, and a turnkey solution. So all is designed, built, and ready for move-in, and our tagline is everything you want in a house. In effect, it's a high-design spec house. So we translated this idea into a mission statement, which we've used as our promotional material. And I'll go through it, even though it's boring to have words on slides, but just to go through it carefully. At Modernist, the focus on modern in the first part, though, so at Modernist, we get urban living. We live downtown, we raise our family downtown, and we thrive on the cultural life of downtown. And that is why in a modernist house, everything is designed the way you want it to be. Good spaces, lots of light, modern detailing, energy efficiency, solid construction, authentic materials, and a family-friendly and healthy living environment. the focus on urbanism here. Modernist houses are located on tree-lined streets in vibrant neighborhoods with good schools and public parks. We know you want to be close to transit to get to work, but we also know you need a place to park the family car. Modernist houses are located within a 5-minute walk of a TTC stop, include parking for your minivan or Mini Cooper, and a backyard for playing ball or enjoying a cocktail after work. And now the focus on quality and value. There. A modernist house is one you can stay in through all stages of your family's life, from preschool to sleepovers to kids off to university. And best of all, because modernist houses are architect designed and are built to the highest standard, they will never go out of style and will increase in value with each passing year. So now, making it happen. Our first venture was highly speculative. We had to invent everything. And now this seems, for some reason, not so bright. I guess because you're getting the... Now I can see you. That's great. We had to establish our name and our brand. So, brainstorming to try to figure out, well, what is this? What are we trying to do? So modern-est, most modern nest. It's a house, so we liked that one. And then we really need to define the first site. We need to define an affordable property. We did a citywide search, and in fact, we've been looking for, sort of off and on, for a number of years, but we finally found the perfect site. I'm going to point with my pen, found our perfect site in Leslieville. The reason it was perfect was it was probably the cheapest piece of land that we could have found in the city. In fact, our lawyer said he could not believe that we had found a piece of property in 2011 for $255,000. I will tell you why it cost $255,000. It was an extremely narrow lot, 14'11" in width. It had been uninhabited for 5 years by humans. There were definitely raccoons living in this space. No heat, no electricity, no water. A burned-out Bronco on the front parking pad had been there for 2 years. And in fact, neighborhood kids were frightened by the house. We got to know the neighbors all very well because everyone was delighted that we were coming to do something about that house. We heard all sorts of stories, too. I won't go into them about the types of criminals who had lived there over time. So anyway, it's on the edge of a very hip neighborhood, Leslieville, just south of Little India, just west of the beaches, and just at the eastern edge of Leslieville. So we felt like there was a real sign that things were changing in this neighborhood. The neighbors, for example, took a lot of pride in their front landscape. They were really taking care of the street. We had the feeling, to think of Jane Jacobs, there were really eyes on the street. This was a very good tree-lined neighborhoody place. But we found out about this property, this one, as I go back to it, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had a 6 o'clock flight to London that night, and we had to make an offer, sign the documents as we were about to hop in our taxi to get to the airport, and we found out that we had gotten the property when we landed. So we knew we had to move fast, though, having lost on bids for properties in the past. It's a very fast-moving real estate market sometimes when things are inexpensive. Finding something under $300,000 in the city is very hard. So after finding the property, the next challenge, of course, was to finance it. So how do you finance a project when you don't have any money? It's very tricky. We thought about this long and hard. We put everything that we had saved into our down payment, into our deposit, actually, rather, and then used the equity on our own house to finance it, and then took a mortgage against this property. So by borrowing against this land, borrowing against our house, and using what meager savings we had scrounged up, we managed to do the property, along with a fantastic contractor who we trusted and who trusted us, who is great about sending us the construction payment requisitions like a month late each time, which was fantastic in the process. So then I'd say the next piece, I'm wondering what my next slide is because, I'll move to the site plan. It's not a very beautiful drawing, but it will be helpful. We needed to define the program because, of course, we didn't have a professor giving us a studio project. We didn't have a client who had come to us with their challenge. We needed to try to figure out what we should build here. We had this very narrow lot. We knew there were two-story houses along the street. And we looked at it two ways. We looked at it first by thinking about what our budget would be for construction. Having spent already $250,000 on a teardown, which seems crazy, that's inexpensive these days. But looking at past sales in the neighborhood, we knew that nothing had ever sold for over $650,000 on the street. So after calculating our soft costs, so designing, apart from our fee, because that was all in-house, but landscape design, engineering, mechanical consultation, arborist costs, and then the zoning variance approval costs, the permit costs, so those are all the pre-construction costs, and then estimating what our post-construction cost would be. Advertising, any other marketing, other sales costs, realtor fees, interest payments. Once we deducted those from this 650 or 700 or maybe 750 we thought we could get, we knew that we had basically $375,000 left in which to build a house. And if you've been building houses in the city recently, and you want to do them very well with no compromise in terms of quality of construction, you really need to budget $300 a foot. So that allowed us a house that was going to be 1,200 to 1,300 square feet. So that was one parameter that got us to what our program was going to need to be. And then we just modeled the rest on our own family. We thought, okay, we're a family of 4, 2 little boys. We would want a 3-bedroom house, 2 bathrooms, a finished basement, parking for 1 car, and a rear yard. So, now I was going to take you into talking about approvals, but I don't have a very interesting slide up here. But I will use this slide just to take you through the approvals process, which is the sort of less sexy part of designing a house, but a very important part, which was to understand what we would be allowed to build as of right, and then what we were going to have to fight with the Committee of Adjustment for in the end. So the site conditions on this property were a little limiting. As I said, we had a 14'11" property, and you can sort of see that it should be toned in, be a little easier for you to see. But we also had this strange little right-of-way here. This almost 3-foot wide, can you hear me? 3-foot wide piece of property that tapered to the end, which when you look back at the original deeds, in 1911, when this series of properties were divided up, there was one very large property divided up in 1911. There was this swath that was deeded to the 2-story house below us and our house to gain access to the backyards. So we had to contend with that piece of property, and we had a beautiful, fantastic ash tree in the backyard, 150-year-old ash tree. Ash trees, as you probably know, are prone in Toronto these days to getting a very big disease called the elm ash tree. What is it? Anyway, it's a borer's disease where these little bugs go in and just destroy the tree from the inside. So we had to take very good care of it. We had it checked out, and it was in great shape. And we had an existing curb cut. So some of those conditions informed what we ended up doing with the site. The zoning restrictions, if you know the zoning for Toronto, I'll just give you a little primer. One's required to set back from property lines. At least 18 inches from your side property lines. And when you're dealing with a less than 15-foot wide piece of property, and you're going to have to lose 3 feet just because, and you're going to end up with a less than 12-foot wide house, it's extremely challenging. It was just going to be too narrow. So we decided, okay, we're going to have to fight for setbacks on the side. The gross floor area is also capped based on the size of your lot. So in Toronto, typically, and in this neighborhood, typically in this zone, you're allowed 60% coverage. So what that translated to was basically a 900 square foot house. That was also going to be too small, in our opinion, for the market. The height was allowed to be 10 meters, which actually wasn't required for our scheme. We thought that would be too high. But we went through a study where we looked at just what a 3-story, 10-meter-high house would look like in this 2-story neighborhood. And it did not seem appropriate. We thought, well, that's the big, that's the sort of biggest scheme we could build, and I suppose if we wanted to make a 5-bedroom house, a 4-bedroom house, we could have gone that high. As of right, pulled away from the neighbor to the north. I actually have shown this drawing that we would have built to the property line on the south because there was this walkway between us and our neighbor, and we thought that wouldn't be such a big fight to get permission to build on that lot line, seeing as the existing house was actually lot line to lot line. But for our scheme really to be viable, we needed to ask for variances, in fact 5 variances, to build this little house that respected the street wall, that was not taller than its neighbors, and that basically filled the same footprint of the existing house. So that was a 3-month process to get the permissions just to build this mass, and not an inexpensive one as well. In fact, Committee of Adjustment has just gotten much more expensive this past year to add to the challenge. The other piece, which is interesting to know, for those of you who don't know, is that when one does submit for a zoning variance, it's called a minor variance because the idea is that it doesn't actually impact the streetscape or the neighborhood in a major way. You also open up your project to criticism or opinions from all of your neighbors within 250 feet. So every neighbor on your street, the next streets, they draw a big circle on a map and they send a notice out, your application basically, to every single individual. And they have an opportunity to come to your hearing and say, I don't like this project. I don't like the look of it. They can't really, they could say that they don't like the look of it. The Committee of Adjustment won't, I think, pay that any heed. But they can object on the basis of their light is compromised in their backyard. It's especially the neighbors on either side. Or access to their property is somehow impacted. And so we were very, very careful. And in all of my projects, I make sure we do this, but very careful to talk to all of the neighbors to make sure that they were on board with the project. We brought our models. We brought our site plan. So our site plan, I'll show you, we actually built to the front setback, which is basically an average of the houses on either side. We ended up asking for permission to go lot line to lot line. And you'll see that the neighbors to the north of us here, we were right up against their house, though fully detached, right up against their house for the first part, for like half of our house, and then their house set back in order to give them windows. But of course, those are grandfathered. They wouldn't be permitted now because one's never allowed to put windows in your side wall when you're too close to the property line. You have to be at least 4 feet from your property line in order to be granted a window, and at that point you can only put something like 7% of your elevation can actually be glazed. But they had pre-existing windows, and so they were, we had to ask for an additional variance to be within 1.2 meters or 4 feet of their windows. We actually negotiated with these neighbors who were lovely people. We showed them our model. We showed them the 2 models, and in fact, the taller model would have made it harder. This is the back of their house, and this is the old house that was there. The taller model, the 3-story model, even if it had been 18 inches from our property line, our shared property line, would have cut down on their light even more. And so by using the tools of the models, because actually I'm still very old school, I make models out of cardboard by hand, and making these models and showing them to them, they could really see that their light was going to be much better if we just stuck to basically where the existing house was, except it was 2 stories. And we talked to them about even different materials that they could face, but really what we did is we showed them the alternatives. They agreed that this one would suit them best, and we also agreed to spend a little bit of design time on their house. And I did a little work for them out of the goodness of my heart, and we installed a skylight over their stairwell in order to give them, to sort of offset the loss of light from their south wall, and we also bought them another window for the rear of their house. So sometimes there's a little give and take, and I think what they ended up feeling in the end is we're going to be adding so much value to this neighborhood, to this street, to their land value, that they were pretty happy that we were doing what we were doing. Because some other developer with a different mindset might have done a very different project there. Now I'm going to move into talking about, I sort of feel like I want to ask questions now, but I suppose questions are later, right? Is that the way? Okay. I'll just keep talking, but I'm going to take a little sip of water because I'm so sorry. Hopefully you can still read them. I'm going to walk you through the plans. I think it's these glasses. I said I was getting old. I've got these bifocal ones now. I would like to just talk about the design challenges and the construction of this one house. As a spec house, the design challenges were to build a house that was going to appeal to many. So we didn't conceive of it as an experimental lab where we would just try to, let's say, redefine the idea of house. You know, it wasn't a, let's completely turn the house on its side and on its end and, completely reinvent the idea. It was, we first of all, sort of put yourselves in our shoes. We'd risked everything, all of our money, all of our time, our children's house. Wanted this to be pretty well a successful proposition. We wanted to be able to sell to somebody and hopefully, attract many bidders and have like a crazy bidding war. So we were, so our challenges, I'll lay them out. I'd say there were 5 basic challenges. And I'll illustrate these with photographs of the house, some sketches, and maybe I'll also try to walk you through the plan. My husband said that I skipped over the plan too quickly as I went through this with him, so I might just walk you through. The basement's on the left. I'll take you through the middle plan in the center, where the entry steps brought us up to the covered entry. So I recessed the entry in. The dining, small closet on the left side, a galley kitchen, long galley kitchen with an island, stools at the end, a dining space in the front, a straight shot stair, open risers to the second floor, living space at the back with a wall-to-wall and floor-to-ceiling lift and slide door at the back. You can see on the left there are actually 4 rather thick bars of poche, which are actually the shear walls for the structure, because as this is basically a shoebox, can you imagine if there's no lateral bracing, the whole house could just rack. So it's a very simple structural system. It's all wood, no steel, except for some steel connectors, embedded into the concrete at the shear wall locations. But there are 3 33-inch shear walls on the left, and then 1 just next to the door. Up on the second floor, as you come up to the top, there's a full-width skylight above the landing at the top of the stairs, full master bedroom at the back, a large bedroom at the front, a small bedroom in the middle, and an ensuite bathroom that also connects to the hallway. So we had this site limitation, which I intimated earlier, this walkway down the side, which you can see on the left side of the first floor plan, that tapered down into a point, and so our site got actually wider at the back. But we were limited in our footprint. We could only build a 40-foot deep house because we had to allow for our neighbor to get into her backyard and for us to get into ours. And so that was actually too limiting for us to accommodate a third bedroom, a decent third bedroom on the third floor. And so we cantilevered out the third floor. I mean, there were other reasons too, but that was a driver. So I'd say that creatively negotiating those site limitations was our first challenge. The second was to really animate the house with daylight. And given this lot line to lot line construction, where the Ontario Building Code, and I'm sure some of you know this extremely well, does not allow you to have any windows in those side walls, we had to figure out how are we going to get light into the center of this house. It's 44 feet deep on the second floor, 40 feet deep on the first, 14 foot 11 wide. We could make our windows as large as possible, front and back, and skylight, and then a notch in the side. I'm going to show you here that in our section, we have our front entry, foyer, stair up to the second floor, skylight that went wall to wall, and then very large windows. And I think I'm maybe getting out of order because I was going to talk about this as being the cantilever. There we go. So the first floor ended at 40 feet. The second floor stuck out another 4 feet in order to shade the wide deck at the back, extend the ceiling out into the landscape from inside, and then give the master bedroom ample space up above. The floor-to-ceiling doors and windows helped make the space feel, I think, larger than it is, and actually taking all of the windows right up to the ceiling also made a difference. Here, the skylight then goes wall to wall and all very simple detailing, no special reveals, but just poplar on edge as a fin detail. And I'm getting ahead of myself because that was my next point about detailing. This notch that we made in the side of the house, even though you're not allowed a window right along the lot line, if it's perpendicular, so this is a little strange, right? If it's perpendicular to the property line but still within 4 feet, you're allowed the window. So there's Milo and Kai, my little guys, visiting the site with me. But from the bedroom, you could see across, we had a window in each side there. So from the bedroom, the small bedroom where they are, and the master bath, well, shared bath where we are, we could get light, views, and fresh air. I'd say another principle that drove the design of this project was the absolute obsession, and this is self-proclaimed obsession with mechanical ducts and coordination of all bumps and jogs, the elimination of bumps and jogs and chases in a house. They're completely unnecessary if you plan it correctly. This is a very messy drawing, but just an example of trying to figure out, you see the red lines are the LVLs that are in the plane, so laminated veneer lumber, right, which are the structural members, which tie into those shear walls I discussed, lead across and tie the whole house together. Managing to work out the ductwork, the plumbing, etc., those are the sort of things that make a space work, in my opinion, but it's the sort of thing that actually, one of the compliments, the biggest compliments I received one day when showing a customer around, potential customer, I thought this was the guy, but it wasn't in the end, but he said, "I don't know why I like this." He said, "But it feels so good." And my sense was he had no idea about what modern architecture was, why he liked what he saw, but my feeling was he has a full ceiling height, he doesn't have coffers and things that are bumping out in the ceilings and in the corners. The lines are clean, the doors go straight up to the ceiling, 8'3" doors on the second floor. It's a clean space because it's been thought out carefully. And I'd say the same, I'll just show you for one example. We had to, because of these LVLs and because of our cantilever at the back, so you'll see the back wall of the house between the living room and the deck, there was an LVL that was in the plane. Oh, thank you. Laser. Ooh. My boys are all about lasers these days. In fact, trapping me as I walk into their bedrooms. But this one's pretty cool. So here is an LVL that runs across the house, and a supply duct, 2 oval ducts, which we fit into another second 2x4 wall here. They go up and then have to get out up above to supply the west wall. Okay, now if you use the other one. To supply the west wall of the master bedroom. So you can see these ducts then now coming up through the floor, have to get up and over an LVL into this wall and to supply this window. In order to do this, what I wanted to do was to we raised the cabinets up to the ceiling, enlarged the plinth below so we could run the ducts there, furred out this wall in a shelf, and brought up the diffuser here. But in no other cases do we have sort of bumps and things, and the idea was to try to integrate them as well as possible into the project. I'd say this slide also shows our trim approach, which was to have the poplar on its edge, 3/4 inch poplar running around the project, around each window, around each cabinet, and that required an extreme amount of care on the part of our contractor to make sure that the framing was perfectly plumb. We'd have a 1/4 inch tolerance or so, but then 1/2 inch drywall, 3/4 inch trim, and then the windows, there's not a lot of space for error. And I believe it's so important to work with a contractor who is extremely attentive to those sorts of details and believes in them, or else it would be a struggle. So I'm going to move this on. We also had no budget for reveals, so we had to try to figure out how were we going to work. This window, for example, is in the front. This is the dining room. Laser. And here, we're wall to wall. You can't see the wall, but I'm basically standing and taking this photograph where the wall is. wall to wall with the trim. All the windows went right up to the ceiling and then dropped down. On the exterior, too, say attention to detail was extremely important to us, and rigorously planning out, where the ducts were going. This is a plan section, cut and drawn by hand on site through the fin wall that is adjacent to the entry foyer, the front entry door, the Douglas fir cladding that wraps that entry, and then the black siding and the jamb extensions of the dining room window facing the street. So working out every 1/2 inch protrusion, 3/4 inch. I mean, it's a laborious but important, and working these out for the contractor meant that when he built, he knew exactly what he was building, and we had no difficulties. On the exterior, we also didn't have a lot of money for fancy finishes. Well, we couldn't use masonry, it was out of the question. We couldn't use zinc cladding. We couldn't use a fiber cement board that I love using. So we ended up settling on pre-finished tongue and groove pine siding. Really inexpensive, like amazingly inexpensive. And what we did is tried to figure out how to just play with the relationship between the bevel, the sort of having these bevels die into, always having the bevels die into a vertical piece that was sheared off, and just sort of played with the, composition of verticals and horizontals, and the relationship then to the weather stripping, which weather stripping up above the door, and the Douglas fir trim, or the Douglas fir siding around the entry, and those jamb extensions. So I'd say that there were limited special features in the house. Everything in terms of the material palette was pretty simple. So wood siding. On the sides, we had to use a black aluminum, which we ran vertically because of fire issues. We didn't run them vertically because of fire issues. We ran them vertically because I wanted to run it vertically. But we had to use aluminum because we had to have a fireproof material on the sidewalls. So the materials were simple. Drywall, but natural wood floors, site finished, which is much more, can be more expensive to install and finish. It takes a week to do that, whereas in a typical developer house, you'll have pre-finished siding that's installed in a day, and bam, you move on because time is money. But we felt that there's calculated decisions about what would add value and what was important to us. So I'd say the natural wood windows, the large lift and slide door, the glass wall inside the house, which served a couple of purposes. One of them was because of our extreme narrowness, which I keep repeating, but it was extremely challenging. We needed to make sure like every 1/2 inch counted in the design of the house and in the construction. And so using a material that was 1/2 inch thick and detailing it properly, top and bottom, meant that we could save some space. But it was not an inexpensive proposition. It was actually a very expensive proposition. But we thought it was worth it. It was the sort of, really I'd say that there were sort of 2 places where we splurged: on the natural wood, large lift and slide and large windows, and on this glass wall. Everything else was pretty plain Jane. In fact, I'll show you the detailing of this. I'll just step back and look at the detailing. But putting in the steel substructure to hold the glass in place so that you didn't have any exposed fasteners was really important. But then when the resolution in the end, the stainless steel went on and it was off by 1/2 inch, it was disastrous, for me. So I had them redo it, and they put on another piece of stainless steel cladding. We'd gone through a really thorough shop drawing phase on this one little piece, as thorough as that can be, and they'd gotten it wrong. So they rectified it, but it's important because if that were not aligned and you could see the wood beyond, especially between the joints in the glass, if you could see the wood beyond the stainless steel, it would have looked really wrong, like we made a big mistake. Away from the extravagances, we used inexpensive materials everywhere else. IKEA cabinets, which you're probably all quite familiar with, but detailing them in such a way that we have a very minimal range hood that we tucked underneath and then trimmed out the cabinets with a thin edge that mimicked our poplar trim around our windows, but really pretty simple in terms of cabinetry and other off-the-shelf hardware. I wasn't going to go to that yet. I'm going to go back. Through the construction period, contract administration is very interesting when you're the architect and the owner. You can make decisions on the spot. So I hired the best contractor I'd ever worked with. That's not generally the developer's modus operandi. They generally want to hire the least expensive contractor or work in-house. That's another model we'll explore, I guess, in the future. But we thought it was so important that our contractor understand detailing in order to make a modern piece work well. There's no trim, no moldings to cover errors, and one who appreciates my involvement. So I was able to resolve issues quickly that came up on site, and I was on site daily as I took it upon myself to also make a video blog of this whole process and posted via YouTube, posted on our website a video of every single day's activities. I wasn't there for the whole day. I actually had to do some work when I wasn't there, but I would go for at least half an hour or so and check out what was happening and film the guys. They all got pretty used to being on camera. At the beginning, they were really shy. They wanted me to bleep it out when they were swearing, when they were tilting up, the big walls that were a little stressful. But we thought it was an interesting, although time-consuming, process. It was potentially going to be a good sales tool. And we've actually had some people say that they found it very informative to look at the whole process because they didn't know, as a layperson, how a house went together. So we have 100 videos from 100 days of construction, but because the architect was the owner and the contractor was excellent, we were really, and the winter was extraordinarily mild, we were able to demolish the house, dig out the hole, because there was no basement. This house, the existing house, was sitting on rotted out 12 by 12s, probably built in the 1880s, that house originally. But because of that winter, we were able to build the house in 5 months. So I'd have to tell you, I will not gloss over the fact that this, the selling and marketing piece, once we had built the house, was the most difficult part of the process by far. I suppose it's because we had no experience with advertising or selling. It's not really what we're comfortable with. We don't know the real estate market that well. We're complete novices. When it comes to designing things, when it comes to building things, I am very comfortable. But we had this illusion that we could sell the house ourselves. If we could do this, we could do everything by ourselves. We didn't want to give up the 5% fee that one has to pay to real estate agents. It's 2.5% on the buyer's broker side and 2.5% on the seller's broker side, and it just seemed so high, considering that we were just hoping to break even on the project. And we had invested this whole year. So we made our modernist blog with project info, plans, videos, sketches, and we got PR advice and pulled together a media package and tried to do a lot ourselves. But in the end, we realized that the MLS, which is the multiple listing service, for those of you who might not know, still has a strong monopoly on sales in Toronto. And I think other places are perhaps changing, and it's starting to change. You see people listing their houses on, I don't know, Property Guide. No, Property Guys is a show. But they can list them themselves. They pay a $500 fee, and then they can gain admission to the MLS platform. But the problem is the selling of real estate is still very much tied to who the broker knows, who they call, how they get the word out, and how they pull people in. Because very few buyers, we are learning this now, very few buyers work without an agent. And so if you don't have an agent yourself as a seller, and you're trying to promote yourself, but no buyer's agents want to come to you because either you're not offering a commission, because go figure, they're not actually trying to sell the house out of the goodness of their heart. They're trying to do it to make money. So we realized in the end that we had to use a broker, at least for this first project. We should not be short-sighted. And so we actually ended up getting sales representation from a wonderful woman who gave us a huge discount, which was amazing, because she was starting out in the business too. So it was a mutually sort of helpful situation where she was getting exposure and we were getting a deal. I have to say that apart from sort of putting it on the market, listing it, figuring out how to price it, which I will talk to you about now, fluffing it. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this idea of fluffing. Fluffing is staging a house. So it's you make this is a pre-fluffed photograph, for example. It has a cutting board on the island, but it doesn't have all of the furniture, which used to be in my house, which came into this house for the period of selling, which was a lot longer than we had expected. So we were sitting in our living room in my own house, the kids, without a couch and without their beds and things like that. So anyways, not the best thing to do. I will tell you about things that I have learned from this, that we've learned, and that is one of them. Do not fluff the house yourself. But it's expensive also to hire a professional fluffer. And we thought, well, we have good taste, and we have a beautiful Noguchi table, Noguchi lamp. Oh, there it is. Why can't we just put those in the space and sell this instantly? So now I'll get to selling. Before you sell, you have to set a price. There were no precedents in this neighborhood for a modern house, and no precedents in this neighborhood for a new house built at this level of quality. So $699. So these numbers are all going to seem really high because when you're a student and you think about buying property, it just seems so crazy. But I'll just put it in context that in Toronto, $700 for a really well-designed house, to us, really didn't seem like that much of a stretch. And something down the street had sold for $650, which was, a renovation, and it was so-so. It had been painted sort of charcoal gray, so it looked kind of okay, but the quality was just terrible. So we thought, really, for $50,000 more, and they could get this, that will be a steal. And we thought we would generate a bidding war. In fact, that's what our real estate agent had recommended. We had over 150 people come through the house at our open house, which was at the beginning of June. But the bidding war didn't happen. In fact, we got one offer. And it was kind of a shock because we thought, okay, we've built this lovely house and we thought that we had figured out what the market wanted and so many people have come to see it. Why hasn't it generated this excitement? And I think we decided to wait, not take our offer that came in. And we figured out what happened, but we ended up having to relist it at a higher price, and then we changed the price again because that seemed like it was too high. Anyway, it was just very difficult. I'd have to say that we've learned a lot from that now, and we won't do that again. But after 5 weeks on the market, we got an offer of $760,000, and we negotiated it up by about 10. And while it wasn't what we wanted, originally we had thought it was around $700, but our costs were running higher. Our construction costs actually weren't higher than we expected. It's just that initially we were a little more optimistic than we ought to have been. But we were at the point finally in July when we thought we need to sell it. All our assets are on the line. Fall was coming on. We wanted to go away for the summer vacation and not worry about it. And every passing month was costing us $3,000 to carry it. So we had to try to figure out, okay, do we carry it for another 3 months to get to when everyone's back in school and the market gets warm again in the middle of September? But then that's $10,000 later. Or do we just take what we can now and go and buy another property? And that's what we did. So lessons learned from house one. We found that selling at a profit in this business is hard. Even given the fact that we got a lot of press. I'm going to show you some press we got, which was crazy. We got the cover of the Globe Real Estate section the Friday before our open house. Then the following day, Lisa Rochon wrote an article. Toronto Life then followed the next week with our house as House of the Week. Spacing Magazine wrote about us. Even the environmentalist Tree Hugger behind us. Architecture blogs picked us up. Arch Daily, Architizer. And then probably one of the things that pleased us most was actually, this is so embarrassing in a way, but the fact that it's actually sort of reached mainstream media and HGTV. I was going to actually put the little clip. It was on last week. It was really funny to watch it, but we were on a show where this brother and sister, I don't know if anybody's ever watched HGTV. It's the cheesiest television station, but it's all about home fix-ups and renos, and you'd be appalled at how terrible a lot of the stuff is. But it was interesting. They wanted to show this house, and this house won out in some competition on this show. But the couple who was looking at it was really taken with the house, and we thought, this is interesting. If a house like this, which isn't exactly your typical Toronto house, can make it in the mainstream, maybe we've got something. So it reaffirmed our belief, in the value of good design, high-quality construction, and reinvesting in our downtown. And I'm going to move off this slide because it's too embarrassing to have it up for too long. These guys are really so icky, sort of awful in the way they talk to one another that I couldn't bring myself to put a clip, but it's really very funny if you're to watch it. They have it on their website. Oh, this is showing what our blog was like, and that you could check on every day, clearing out the junk, and then porta potties arrive the next day. And so anyways, a little bit silly. We had, before we had photographs to show, I had just done some drawings to sort of show what the house would be like. So the broader implications of this enterprise, we believe there are huge benefits to the city of this sort of approach to infill densification. So economically sustainable, we're reinvesting in the built fabric. You get more value out of the existing infrastructure of the city. It leads to people supporting local shops, markets, parks, as opposed to moving out to the suburbs. Environmentally sustainable, there's a very high walkability score for this location and for, I'll tell you about the next one in a second. Close to public transit, a small building footprint, which we believe really, if you're conserving land and allowing for reduced energy consumption, that's one of the best things you could be doing. And if you build well, if you invest in the construction quality of your building, you're doing the most responsible thing environmentally, in our opinion. Especially if the houses are designed to be flexible in terms of their space, their spatial design, in terms of the way that a family can adapt and the house can adapt to a family's changing needs. That's the best way for a house not to become obsolete. And it's socially sustainable, creates stable neighborhoods. Residents are invested in the neighborhoods for the long term. So, can it succeed? Well, there's an interesting precedent for branding of a modern, forward-thinking development company, which you may know of. I don't know what, if you would know of this developer, Joseph Eichler, who in the late 40s and 50s in the San Francisco area developed, actually I have a picture I think here, Eichler Homes, where he had a vision. He was told it was esoteric, but he went ahead and did it. He spent way more on design. He had 2 design firms working for him. He wasn't an architect, but he loved architecture. And he had a very different climate to work with, but he virtually created a new model of suburban development there that was more progressive and design-based than anything else that was happening in its time. It's the same time as Levittown, et cetera. And Eichler was not about approaching each house as an opportunity for the next architectural masterpiece, but rather he used design excellence to create a broad new look and feel to the built environment. That's what we hope to do. We'd like to be the urban Eichler. Stay tuned for Modernist House 2. It's starting its journey now at King and Bathurst in Toronto, and we'll let you know how it goes. Thank you.